Now, it's very rare for me to have every generation of a car lined up at one go, but I do have them here today, right from the first generation BMW X5 that was launched almost 20 years ago right here in Atlanta, right down to the spanking new fourth generation BMW X5 that I'm here to test drive. Now, this has always been a car that we really enjoyed from behind the wheel, but BMW are not just happy with that. With this new generation, they want to widen their appeal. They're promising more space, more comfort, more refinement. So will this be the best of both worlds, backseat and behind the wheel? Well, that's what I'm here to find out. Instantly you see the difference. It's the kidney grills. They're on steroids now and they dominate the nose. They also have a single-piece chrome surround and active vanes too. There are also larger air dam areas split into 3 distinct sections, and the fogs are neatly housed on the top of the side air dams, which are once again massive in size. New LEDs are standard and you can opt for laser lights too. While the side profile feels familiar, contour lines have changed, and the crease under the window line, though subtler, carries a new kink upwards under the rear window to accentuate the flanks. And there are smart new double-spoke alloys. The rear gets more contours than before, with strong crease lines under the new LED lights, which adds a lot of width. The skid plates front and rear rise up higher, and overall it's a more beefed up and aggressive looking SUV. Well, the good news is that this new X5 has grown in size, in length, in width, in height, but we're interested in the space that's really increased between these two wheels. It's going to open up a lot more room in the back seat, and I'm going to check it out. Oh yes, instantly you can tell the difference in space. There is a lot more leg room over here. It does feel wider in the back seat as well. But more than that, what's really making it feel nice and open and airy is this massive panoramic sunroof. Space in the back seat has increased, but boot volume remains pretty much the same. Now, nothing to grumble about because it is a large enough boot at 650 litres, a lot of volume there. And of course, now both sides of the split tailgate are operated at the touch of a button to open and to close. So from behind the wheel, there's a lot that's new as well. I really like this large 12.3-inch digital cluster that's new. You get an equally large infotainment screen and you can operate between the both, deciding what information you want to have displayed where. This infotainment screen, if you remember in the earlier version, was sort of standalone, but now it comes better integrated into this entire digital cluster and looks much nicer as well. Looks more cohesive in the design. Even the air vent's shape has changed. It's got nice chrome surround for the air vent and for the music controls over here. The central console itself used to be flatter, but now slopes up and is more integrated into the entire dashboard. And talking points in this car, of course, are this very snazzy glass crystal-like gear lever. Even the iDrive now gets a glass top, the start-stop button, and even the volume button as well. Features at this point have not been sealed for the Indian version, but there are things like ambient air package, a 20-speaker 1500-watt BMW system, thermocup holders that can be heated or cooled, and a host of safety and driver assist systems, including the very popular Park Assist. But it remains to be seen what makes it to our country. You can also opt for a third row of seats, and I'll come to that a little later. The lakeside at Painted Rock Farm in Georgia was the perfect setting to examine the car closely. And then it was time to drive. Atlanta was chosen for this drive because the first X5 was launched here almost 20 years ago. The engine I'm driving now is the 30D, the staple in India. It's a 3-litre diesel that produces 265 HP and 620 Nm of torque. It's a familiar engine and it still has that good mid-range torque. Feels pretty much the same to drive, but what's changed is refinement. The gruff note of the earlier engine is gone. It's far quieter now, and in fact, overall cabin refinement has improved. It's far more hushed on the inside. The engine is not only refined in the way that it sounds, but even in the way that it delivers power. It's far smoother. The sudden kickdown of torque is no longer there, and that does take a little away from the thrill factor, but make no mistake, this engine is still as quick as before. The 8-speed gearbox has been updated too, with a wider spread of ratios for better efficiency. On the winding sections of road, you can tell that this car has grown in size, and so it's lost a little bit of its agility, but that still doesn't take away from the fun to drive experience of the X5. It still feels stable, solid and planted. What has improved quite dramatically is the level of comfort that the car now offers its passengers. Now the roads here are far better than the roads at home, but still when we go over the bad sections of road, the ride quality feels improved. It just flattens out the bad sections much better. We also got an opportunity to test the off-road package and what it can do in off-road conditions. So we're pretty much putting this X5 through its paces, little bit of slush, little bit of rock crawling, ascending steep hills that are slippery, going down descents, and so far it's doing everything really well. The off-road package is being offered for the first time on an X5, with modes that are tuned for different grip levels and conditions. This option was offered with a lot of customers wanting a little more off-road capability from the X5, and it will widen its appeal for sure. So, I've been in the 5-seater version all day, but there is a 7-seater on display here as we've come to the end of the day. I'm going to check it out and see what that's like, because you could opt for a 7-seater version. As you can see, access is really easy, touch of a button. Space inside still at the best for small kids. It is a bit tight at the back, although there is marginally more room. Now, of course, you have to remember, you can either opt for 7 seats or 5 seats and a spare tire. Well, the new X5 definitely has a lot more for its customers. Well, it's been 5 years since the last brand new X5 that we saw, and the older one in India was a bit aging. This one brings all the modernity to the table. It's packed with features, it's better on refinement, it's better on comfort, and we asked ourselves at the beginning, will this now offer the best of both worlds, back seat and behind the wheel? Well, it still remains completely enjoyable to drive, and yes, the back seat is far more comfortable. BMW X5 is back in the game.
Welcome to Autocar, and you join me on the beautiful California coastline. And we're going to give you a first look today at one of the most anticipated motorcycles of 2018, the brand new Royal Enfield Interceptor 650.
The Interceptor is not a new name for Royal Enfield, and the original Interceptor was sold in America in the 1960s, and it gained quite a following back in its day. So it's quite fitting that over half a century later, we get to ride the modern Interceptor 650 and its twin, the Continental GT 650 here as well. Both these bikes are identical under the skin, and the only differences come in the design and the riding position. So we're going to focus this review largely on the Interceptor, which is sure to be the much bigger seller in our market.
Now, it's nearly been a full year since we first saw the Interceptor 650 at EICMA 2017, and visually, not a lot has changed since. This is still an old school and very handsome looking motorcycle.
The Interceptor makes a great first impression with a clean and classic design that comprises an old-school round headlamp, a well-shaped fuel tank, a long and flat seat, and a smart-looking set of 18-inch spoke trims. As a result of this utter straightforwardness, the big parallel twin engine lurking within the chassis plays a large role in the design. Now, the engine is quite wide, which is why Royal Enfield has installed small metal protectors on either side to prevent the knees from accidentally coming in contact with hot metal. Build quality and finish all round are at very acceptable levels, but there are a few reminders that this bike is meant to be accessible to a large audience. You'll notice that in the simple switchgear and the lack of features like adjustable levers, LED lighting, and in the simple twin pod dials that give you a fuel gauge and 2 trip meters, but miss out on a clock and a gear position indicator. And with that out of the way, let's get to the bit that you've really been waiting to hear about.
Now, Royal Enfield's already shown us in the past that they can build a good chassis, and bikes like the old Continental GT and the Himalayan have been proof of that. But as far as engines, that's not always been the case. And this time, the big test lies in this area.
With the brand new 648cc parallel twin engine, Royal Enfield has taken a deep dive into the modern era. Gone are the old pushrod actuated 2-valve setups, and the bike now gets a 4-valve head with a single overhead camshaft. A balancer shaft promises to take care of any refinement issues, and a 6-speed gearbox with a slip assist clutch is another first for the company.
And the result of all that work is really impressive. This is an engine that doesn't sound or feel like any Royal Enfield engine you've ever experienced in the past.
You won't find a Kickstarter here, but a brief press of the starter button quickly fires up the motor, and it erupts into a smooth but deep and offbeat pulse. Low-speed manners are impeccable thanks to very well-judged fueling that ensures opening the throttle never feels abrupt or jerky. The slip assist clutch results in smoother downshifts, and the clutch lever weight is reasonable too. What you'll notice almost immediately is that this engine is really smooth. There's a small amount of feeling in the handlebar and pegs, but this is consistent across all speeds, be it 20 km/h in town or 120 km/h on the highway. Once at highway speeds, the all-important 100 kph cruise arrives at just above 4000 rpm, at which point the bike is absolutely relaxed. 120 kph is at an almost equally stress-free 5000 rpm. If you find the space, the Interceptor will show you above 180 km/h on the clocks. And for those of you interested, Royal Enfield claims a fuel efficiency of 25.5 kpl in the World Motorcycle Test Cycle. Both the Interceptor 650 and the Continental GT 650 share a new double cradle chassis as well as the same suspension and brake setup. Dual channel ABS is standard, but there's no electronic wizardry in the form of traction control or riding modes. On the road, ride quality is compliant but a little on the firm side, and I'm keen to see how this pans out on Indian roads. But out in California, we were treated to some superb winding roads, both tight and flowing, and the Interceptor proved to be more eager here than I was expecting. Even though the pace on our ride wasn't flat out, it was quite brisk in some sections, and that revealed that the Interceptor 650 is not a sport bike, but it's no slouch either.
The best way to describe how this bike handles is neutral. It does whatever you ask of it, it never pulls any surprises, and you can actually carry some serious speeds through the corners. Everything works perfectly well, the suspension is compliant, the brakes are up to the mark, and I never even had any issues with the cornering clearance. Now, this is a very straightforward motorcycle, but it's also one you can have a lot of fun on.
Everything about the Interceptor's chassis setup encourages you, and the bike's dynamic limits are quite high. A couple of hours into the ride, I started to struggle with the quest to find negatives with this motorcycle. Aside from a seat that starts to feel firm after a while, the one issue I found was that the front end starts to get a little light upwards of 120 km/h. It's not scary or intimidating, and the steering never threatens to go into a tank slapper, but you do feel it happening. How that tendency will pan out on our imperfect roads is something to be seen. At this point, we get to the right time to discuss the Continental GT, because the difference between these two bikes largely lies in how they feel to ride. On the go, the GT puts you in a much more sporty riding position that makes the bike feel more involving on the right kind of roads, but it is more taxing on the back and wrists. What this also does is that it encourages you to ride harder and harder and pushes the chassis into a zone of discomfort faster than you would tend to do with the Interceptor. As you'd expect then, the Conti is the one to have for quick and exciting rides, but the Interceptor can be just as fast when you want it, and it is more of a pleasure to ride at slow speeds and over longer distances. The new Royal Enfield twins are remarkably enjoyable motorcycles to ride, and they represent a quantum leap forward for the company. But the really exciting news is that both these bikes are expected to go on sale in India soon, and the price is rumored to be below the ₹3 lakh mark, which is simply sensational. Royal Enfield is about to unleash its twins among the pigeons, and that's going to give a lot of manufacturers, both domestic and international, a lot to think about.
Based on our initial experiences here in California, it's clear that Royal Enfield just hasn't made two new motorcycles, they've entered a whole new era. Now, this is without any form of exaggeration, a world-class product, and I'm really excited to see what it's like to ride back home. For now, I think the only questions that remain to be answered are how it will fare in the long run and just how competitive the price is going to be. Well done, Royal Enfield. Well done.
What I have with me today is a recipe for intimidation. You see, they tell me it's the fastest and quickest SUV on the planet right now. And with a top speed of 305 kilometers an hour and 0 to 100 in just 3.6 seconds, you can bet I believe them. And the other reason it's intimidating is because it's a Lamborghini. And if you know your supercars, you'll know that they make only the hardest and fiercest ones of them all. And today, I'm going to sample this massive, quick behemoth on tiny, twisty Indian roads. So, wish me luck. Actually, this is not the first Lamborghini SUV. That was the LM002 of the late 80s. But while that thing was an Italian take on the Humvee, the Urus feels altogether more Lamborghini-ish. Just look at those lines and cuts, and that roofline that just slams down to the tail. The headlamps and tail lamps are just slit like LEDs, and there's Y-shaped motifs everywhere. And did you ever think you'd see the day when 22-inch wheels were the medium size? You can opt for 23s, and Lambo even says they're working on a set of 24s. Does it need to have all this madness? Certainly not, but it's a Lambo, and by God, it simply has to look wild. And now, in what is an unprecedented move for most Lambo reviews, I'm going to talk about practicality. Now, the back seat of the Urus is really good by Lamborghini standards, which it would be because most Lamborghinis don't have back seats. But by SUV standards, it's really not that bad either. Legroom is really rather good. Comfort and support from the seat is good as well. But headroom, well, it's a little bit tight thanks to the sloping roof. Lamborghini says you can fit somebody who's 6'3" in the back here, but I suspect it would be quite tight for them. It's even got a massive boot, a whole 616 liters, and you can drop the seats for more. No, there's no full-size spare, but you do at least get an inflatable space saver. Unfortunately, our time with the Urus today is all too brief, and all we have is a quick blast up and down a narrow Ghat road. And like I said at the start, that could be a recipe for intimidation. However, once you get inside and start driving, it's really not that intimidating at all. I mean, sure, everything inside here looks very Lamborghini, but as a driving experience, it feels very much like any big luxury SUV. I mean, I'm sitting nice and high up, I've got a great view forward. Okay, the view at the back is not that great at all thanks to the sloping roof. But otherwise, this would be right at home on any highway or traffic road. It feels spacious, and thanks to air suspension, it rides well despite those 22-inch wheels. But most of all, it gives you that commanding feeling from behind the wheel. The cabin too feels big and SUV-like, but also distinctly Lamborghini. If the cabin of a Huracan is like a fighter jet cockpit, this one feels more like the bridge of a battleship, with all the aviation-themed controls spread across a huge dashboard. It gets digital dials, of course, but what's more interesting is the dual touchscreen infotainment borrowed from the Audi A8. There are almost no buttons, and so you have to take your eyes off the road to use it. There's a virtual haptic click, but that only means you have to prod the screen harder for it to work. Not ideal. Similarly, while the tamburo lever for the drive modes and the gear selector both look cool, they don't feel intuitive to use and will take a lot of getting used to. Still, there's no denying it all adds to the drama of being in a Lambo. Now the road's getting a bit twisty, time to see what the Urus is more of, an SUV or a Lamborghini. Now I have the car currently in Strada mode, which is essentially for the street and for comfort. And I gotta say, yes, it does feel very much like an SUV, but there's no escaping the lump of power that lives under the bonnet. The throttle is a bit mushy early on, of course, this being comfort mode, but once you push it past, say, the 2000 RPM mark, you feel it come to life and you hear a bit of a rumble. Now this engine, this 4-liter V8, is closely related to the engine you get in a lot of VW Group cars. The Porsche Panamera and Cayenne, for example, and also Audi's RS6 and RS7. This is the most powerful iteration of it so far, and also definitely the best sounding one. Definitely not the same as the naturally aspirated motors, but still pretty good. Things get decidedly better once you dial it up into sport mode. The gear shifts are more aggressive now, and there's more of that growl. It's gotten a little bit bumpier, but what I like is that body control has tightened up and the steering's gotten a bit heavier and weightier, which is nice on a road like this. I've now put it into Corsa mode, which is of course for the track. And oh, it's gotten even louder. If you thought this 4-litre V8 sounded aggressive in something like a Porsche Panamera, that's how it sounds in sport mode here. When you put it in Corsa, it sounds like you've never heard it before. Oh, the shifts are aggressive in Corsa mode. Yeah, it's a proper Lamborghini, at least when it comes to the gearbox. Now, aggressive and exciting as it is in Corsa mode, I think I'll dial it back down to sport for use on the road because it's just a little bit more manageable that way. The steering is just unbelievable. This 2-meter wide car turns in so sharply, and of course that has a lot to do with the rear wheel steering system that virtually shortens the wheelbase. I never thought such a big car could be so agile. But hey, I guess that's what you get when you ask Lamborghini to make an SUV. What you also get is a price to match. At 3.1 crore rupees ex-showroom, there are only a handful of SUVs more expensive than an Urus. But while most of those focus on luxury, this one is all about the performance. It may not be quite as brutal as a Huracan or a Aventador, but no SUV I've driven has ever come closer to replicating that savage Lambo feel. And when you dial it back to Strada mode, it becomes plush and comfy and truly usable on Indian roads. No wonder it's sold out for the first year in India. It's not the perfect Lambo, nor is it the perfect SUV. But as a combination of the two, the Urus is far greater than the sum of its parts.